In this lecture, let's work on making this edit button work. So whenever you click a particular edit button, technically what should happen is you should be able to open up this particular expense on a new page or on a new form, and you should be able to edit the details for that particular expense, like the name, amount, and category. So in order to do that, first of all, you have to create a brand new view called as edit. So let's open up VS Code right up over here, go inside the views.py file, and let's create a new view here called as edit. So I would say def edit. In here, this is going to accept a request, and this is going to return and render a particular template which we are going to pass here. But for now, let's simply say myapp/edit.html, and we have to work on creating that particular template. So this edit template which we are going to have, it's simply going to render up the form which allows us to edit a particular expense. That means in order to implement the edit functionality, we first of all need to create a form, just as we have this form up over here. Now, one best thing about Django is that you could still make use of the expense form which you have created here. So the expense form is created in forms.py, which is this form right here. And as of now, we are already using that particular expense form up over here, and we are getting the data and kind of posting it to the database. Now the same expense form which is being used here could also be used here as well. So in order to do that, you simply have to go ahead and say expense_form and get the expense form. Now let's take this particular expense form and pass it to the edit.html and see the kind of result we would get. So let's pass in the expense form here as context. So expense_form, I would say expense form. Okay, so now once we have passed in that expense form, let's go to my app and create a new template like edit.html. And as usual, this template is going to extend from the base template. So I would say extends my app/base.html. And then I would have the usual block body and end block tags. So block body, and then finally let's have the end block tag. So end block. Okay, so once we are done with this, now let's render up the expense form which we have up over here. So first of all, I would say form. We won't add any kind of method here as of now. And now let's render up the expense form. So I would say expense_form. Now we have passed in the expense form, we have created this view as well, but now we need a URL pattern for edit. So let's temporarily set up a URL pattern for edit. And for that, I will actually go inside the urls.py file, which is this file right here. And just as we have a path for index, I will also create a path for edit as well. So let's say this thing says edit, and we won't pass in any ID here as of now. I would simply say views.edit and then name equals edit. We'll keep it simple as of now. Now let's see what happens if I go up over here and if I say /edit. So if I say this, I get a form here, which is all fine and good. And that's exactly what we wanted as well. But now this form which we get here, this form is empty. But whenever you're editing something out, technically what should happen is that you should be able to get the data which you're editing as well. Now this kind of looks like a regular submit form which we have here to submit a new expense, but we want to edit the current expense. That means the expense which we are currently editing, that data should be populated up over here. So which means if I click on the edit button for iPhone, I should be redirected to this page with the data for iPhone filled up, which means that we now need to go ahead and get the particular expense on the basis of the ID. So let's do that as well. So that means I now have to return back to the view which I have, which is in this case, this view right up over here. And I need to make this view accept an ID as well. So now this ID belongs to the expense ID which we want to edit. That means we now need to get that ID and get the expense from that ID. Now you would think, from where exactly are you going to get that ID? So we want to get that ID from the URL pattern which we have. So this right here is nothing but the URL pattern which we are looking for. So the URL pattern should be designed in a way that it should be able to accept an ID of that particular expense which we want to edit. Therefore, I would say /, and I want to make this thing accept an ID, and the type of ID should be integer. So I would say int ID, give a slash, and we should be good to go. So that means now whenever I need to edit an expense, I cannot simply just go up over here like that. Instead, I would say edit/1, or let's say edit/2. So if I say edit/2, that's going to present me a form which allows me to edit the expense number 2. So now once we have that ID from the URL pattern, we could take that particular ID and kind of get a specific expense from that particular ID and fill this form with that particular expense. And the way in which you would do that is you would go inside the view here and get the expense. So I would say expense equals, take the expense model, get the objects, and instead of saying objects.all, I would now say objects.get, because I want to get an expense where the ID of the expense is equal to nothing but this ID which we have gotten from here. So this ID is nothing but the ID which you get from the URL pattern. So for example, if I type in 1 here, this one is now going to be passed up over here to this particular function. That one is going to be passed up over here, and this will get the expense where the ID of that expense is 1. Now once we have this expense, we will pass that expense as an instance to this form. So even if we get that expense now needs to be passed up over here to this form so that these form fields would be automatically filled. So in here I want to say the instance is going to be expense. Now let's see the magic what happens if I say edit/1. If I hit refresh, now as you can see, this form is now filled up with the first expense, which is iMac. Now the expense ID for iPad is 3, which means if I go ahead and say edit/3, I would get the edit form for iPad. And that's exactly what we have wanted. But now the thing is, we are manually going ahead and we are manually typing in these IDs here. But instead we want to automate that process, and basically when we click on one of these edit buttons here, we want to be redirected to those URLs. So doing that is quite simple. I just need to go inside the index.html where we have the edit button. So here is where we have the edit button, and inside these edit buttons I simply have to say that okay, whenever somebody clicks an edit button, I want to go to that specific URL. Here the URL which we want to go for is /edit/ the ID of that expense. So in here, to specify that URL, I'll make use of template syntax, and I would say I want a URL which is going to be nothing but the URL which we have just created, which is this URL, and we have already named this URL as edit. That means I could now use that name up over here by saying edit. And along with this edit, the next parameter the URL needs to accept is actually the ID, which means I should also be able to get the expense ID as well. So just as we have gotten the expense name, amount, and date, I would say expense.id, and this will give me the expense ID. So now once we have this URL is now formulated. So I could save this, go back here, go back to the home page, let's hit refresh. And now if I inspect one of these elements or one of these edit buttons, you will be able to see that they now have a specific URL associated with them. And now if I click on them, as you can see, if I click on the edit button for iMac, I get an edit form for iMac. If I click on the edit button for iPhone, I would get the edit form for iPhone, so on and so forth. And that's exactly what we wanted. Now the only thing that needs to be done here is that we should be able to change this and submit this particular form, and the data should be submitted. So the form should be submitted and the data should be edited. So let's work on that part in the next lecture.